equipping you to navigate your grief journey after child loss. This is the Hope After Child Loss podcast. On each episode, we explore the many challenges of grief as guests share their stories of loss. It's also a place where you will hear about God showing up in our darkest moments and restoring meaning, purpose, and hope to shattered lives. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Greg Buffkin, and thanks for joining us. My guest on this episode is Betty Ringeisen. Betty is a pastoral counselor, speaker, and author of a recently published book entitled Waiting for Jedediah, which we'll be talking about later in our conversation. Betty and her husband have experienced the unthinkable loss of 5 children to miscarriage. We'll also be talking about God's faithfulness and kindness during such a dark season in restoring hope, joy, and purpose in Betty's life. And now, here's my conversation with Betty. It's so good to have you with us today.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for having me. And I'm just so blessed to be able to interact with your audience. So thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. And the privilege is all mine. I'm just thankful for moms and dads like you, Betty, who have the courage to share your stories, because it's not always an easy thing to do. But I think the end result is that it blesses other people and gives them some hope.
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely, because when you experience the loss of a child, hope kind of dissipates for a while.
Yeah, it really does.
Well, Betty, like I do with all of my guests, I want to give you a couple of minutes just to share a little about yourself, whatever you would like, about your family. So I'm just going to give you the platform here for a couple of minutes.
All right. Thank you, Greg. Well, my name is Betty Ringeisen, and I am the author of Waiting for Jedediah, How to Experience God's Healing After a Miscarriage. I've been married to my husband, Donnie, for almost 30 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We have 9 children. We have 4 children on earth, and we have 5 children in heaven waiting for us. It is available on Amazon. So your readers can order it after they hear this discussion, or they can visit my website at bettyringeisen.com to find out more about me.
And I will attach a link to your website in the episode summary for those of you who might want to order the book.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, sure. Betty, and when you talked about losing a child through miscarriage, you experienced it 5 times. One time is too much, but I mean, I just simply cannot imagine walking through that 5 times, knowing that grief affects us in so many different ways. What a lot of people don't really probably understand is the physical impact and the mental impact. They see the emotional impact, and I think unfortunately, that's all that they see. Let's talk a little bit about what that impact looked like for you personally.
Yeah, I mean, we had 3 healthy children. I actually had 3 pregnancies that I carried the children 42 weeks. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, so I just think I came to understand I have a longer gestation period than other women. But so we sailed through the pregnancies, never had any pre-labor, anything like that. And so when we lost our first baby, it was a shock, actually. And I really didn't know what to do with that because we had 3 children. I'd never experienced any complications. But at the time, the Lord gave me a vision of me nursing a baby in a rocking chair, and he said there will be more babies. And I wasn't really sure what that meant, if those babies would live or they would die. And so the vision of me nursing a baby was something that I held on to through that entire dark valley in our life, where we were either experiencing the joy of finding out we were pregnant once again, or the sorrow of seeing an empty uterus on the sonogram screen. And so I just kept coming back to what the Lord had said. There will be more babies, and the vision that he gave me. And that gave me the hope to hang on, even though, I walk through all the stages of grief. And that's the difficult thing when you lose, multiple preborn babies, because, you might be in the acceptance stage for baby one, but then you're in denial for baby two. So it just, by our fifth miscarriage, emotionally, I was just drained.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, it was really such a hard time. And my OBGYN, who we met when we lost our third baby, he was in the emergency room. I went into labor, went to the hospital, and he walked in and said, "Why is this happening?" And I said, "Well, they say it's my age," because at the time I was 39. And he looked at me and he said, "I think we can do better than that." And
Wow.
at that time, as I was in labor, knowing that the baby was not alive, it was like a lifeline, those words. And he sent me to a specialist. They figured out what was happening. I actually have a blood disorder that they couldn't figure out how I carried three children without having any difficulties, and why it was appearing at this time.
Wow.
But he fought for us, and he just is my hero. And he didn't smile until I was about 7 months pregnant with Jedediah. I said to him at my 7-month visit, I said, "It's going to be okay." And he looked at me and he said, "Okay." But yeah, physically it was draining, because I was either pregnant and experiencing, morning sickness, or when you go into miscarriage, you actually have those same symptoms. You're nauseous, you're tired. So it can be like this uncertainty. Is this because the baby's alive, or is this because the baby has died?
Yeah.
And so it was 2 years of just up and down and up and down. And it was a very difficult walking through the valley of the shadow of death, really, literally.
Yeah, literally.
Psalm 23 took on such a deeper meaning to me, and I recite it every day now, just because I feel like that best described what we were walking through.
Yeah. I completely understand that, Betty, because I can remember when we lost Ryan, I remember thinking the same thing, that, we're literally there
Yeah.
in that valley.
Yeah.
And what a difference the right physician makes.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah, it's true. And that's a great insight that I offer to women. Young, I'm now at the age where I'm a Titus woman to some young women that are in my life. And when they go through a miscarriage and they're not happy with their doctor, I encourage them to go find someone who can really minister to them. And that doesn't mean that they have to be a believer, but they have to be able to be sensitive to what you're going through. And some of them aren't, and I don't, some of them are better at it than others, I should say. And I was very thankful. This doctor was the doctor that God used in our life to just bring us Jedediah.
Yeah, man. Wow. What a gift.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a gift.
I can't imagine how long that 2 years felt. Probably seemed like a decade.
Yeah.
When you're going through something that painful and when there's so much uncertainty. Did grief manifest itself with you with any of that grief brain or the grief, like we talk about brain fog? Did you experience that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. You know, the difficult thing about grieving the loss of a preborn baby is that it's a lonely grieving because people don't really know what to do with you. They don't know if you want to talk about it. They just kind of don't say anything. Where I really wanted to talk about it, I needed to talk about it because there was so much going on in my head and I couldn't think. And you know, that grief that just kind of is like a weighted blanket where you just need someone to say, hey, do you want to meet for coffee? And just so you have something to get out of bed for. But yeah, all that and then more, because it is a lonely grieving period because people just don't know if you want to talk about it or not. And for me, and I know every mother is not like this. Some don't want to talk about it. They don't even tell people that they've had a miscarriage. But for me, I wanted to talk about it because for me, if the baby had lived, um, and had been born, then we would have had a funeral, and and that would have that there's I mean the we need that. I mean, in this day and age, you know, people die and it doesn't seem like there's funerals anymore. And there's a reason that those funerals are important. You know, when I was young, when my grandparents died, we're Irish Catholics, so they had the wake and the funeral were in my home. And so there were 2 days of people coming to the house and paying respects and being with us and bringing food. And then there was the funeral and people sitting with us and crying and grieving and telling stories. And with a miscarriage, that doesn't happen. And so, and a lot of people don't understand how a mother, you know, the minute a woman sees that line in the pregnancy test window that confirms she's pregnant, she's attached. And so
Absolutely.
being detached, I felt detached. I felt detached from God, from my family, from myself. You know, I wasn't really sure where to put all this grief and process it through it.
How did it affect your identity?
Well, that was something that during that time God really had to free me from, because ever since I was a little girl, I grew up in a big family. Both of my parents, you know, my dad had 10. There were there's lots of aunts and uncles, and I know like my third cousins. So ever since I was a little girl, I wanted to have a big family. And so that I felt like that became part of my identity, like this is what I'm here to do, which it is. I'm the mother of 9 children. It is part of why I'm here on earth. But my identity, this is what I learned during this time, is that my identity isn't what I do, it's who I am. And
Exactly.
and it's what God calls me. And
Yeah.
during that time, he had to separate that from, you know, me thinking this is who I am. This is what I am. It's not. Death is not any part of our identity as children of God. And so
Right.
so that can be a hard thing, especially for a woman.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think sometimes this goes often unsaid, is that I think it leaves a mom feeling like a failure and feeling like she did something wrong. And in the vast majority of cases, it's neither. I mean, she's certainly not a failure. She's in all likelihood, she didn't do a thing wrong. We live in a fallen world and bad things happen.
Yeah. It's true. When I lost our first child, I had just come back from a run. I'm a runner. And so I knew I was pregnant. So I wasn't, I was just jogging. But yes, I came home and the miscarriage had already started. So I really wrestled with that. Oh my gosh, is this because I went running? Or, many women wrestle with, I had a glass of wine. I didn't even know I was pregnant. Is this why? Or I didn't take prenatal vitamins. It's like, no, there's in many cases, and I really believe that I actually think that when we get to heaven, there's going to be some children that women didn't even know they were pregnant with, because I think that miscarriage happens before a woman that really knows she's pregnant. So I think that we're going to be some women are going to be like, who is this baby? And she's going to be so blessed. But, so many times we don't even know we're pregnant and we're doing things, but that's not how God works.
No, it's not.
It wasn't. And I had to release that. And especially, when they did do the test, it revealed that I have a blood disorder, and my blood was actually clotting in the uterus and basically killing the babies, because they couldn't grow because my blood was clotting. And I mean, that's not something I had to really just release that.
Yeah, you had no control over that. And I am very curious at this point. By any chance, is what you're referring to is it factor 5?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking that, Betty, is because my daughter, Whitney, was in the ICU back early in December, having been diagnosed with a pulmonary embolism. So they did the factor 5 testing through the blood work and discovered that she indeed did have it. So I know that's kind of an aside, but when you started describing that, I was very suspicious that that's what you were referring to.
Yeah, that's it. And they have no clue how it wasn't a problem with the first 3 pregnancies. But, I'm so thankful. And, the Lord, we figured it out. We were with an excellent specialist, and they were able to give me blood thinners. Our 4th miscarriage, which was a set of twin boys, they gave me blood thinners through the first trimester. And then I miscarried at 15 and a half weeks. I went into labor, and we went to the hospital, and they said, did you know you're pregnant with twins? And we were just ecstatic. I still remember that feeling of
I'll bet.
the doctor saying, are you aware you're pregnant with twins? And my husband and I looked at each other, and there was so much joy in our heart. But then he said, I'm so sorry, but neither of them has a heartbeat.
Oh.
And so, but they were able to figure out that I needed to be on blood thinners all through my pregnancy. And once they figured that out, a year later, I was holding my son, Jedediah,
who had a book written about him.
He did.
How about that?
I was just telling him that I was doing a podcast, and he reminded me that every time I use his name, I have to give him 50 cents. So
royalties, huh?
Royalties, yes.
As a matter of fact, I believe he was our engineer at the beginning. So for our listeners, if either Betty or I or both of us sounded a little frazzled at the outset, it's because we had a few minutes of technology issues, shall we say. And her teenage engineer figured it all out for us.
Jedediah to the rescue.
Yep. Betty, what were some aspects of grief that you struggled with the most? Because there are women listening today that are in an earlier season of grief, and sometimes you think you're going crazy, whether you're a mom or a dad, and you've lost a child. So for you, what would you say was the most difficult aspect of it, and how did you deal with it?
I think the hardest thing for me, if you're, talking about the stages of grief, I wrestled with being angry, and anger is usually rooted in fear. And so, in just thinking of that, as miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage was happening, the fear was growing in my heart that I'm going through all of this and it's having an emotional impact on me and a physical impact. And is it going to be worth it? That was the hardest thing, just, because the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and he wants us to be fearful. And so,
Absolutely.
and he lies to us. And so the lie was, I'm not going to get a baby out of all of this. And I'm, going through all this suffering. And honestly, I'm aware that there are some women who are going to read my book that they come to the end of their journey of miscarriage and they don't get a baby.
Right.
They have to wait till heaven to see their baby and hold their baby. I'm aware of that. And I knew writing this book, I wanted to be extra sensitive to that. And I pray, as I was writing the pages, I pray that God would open the wombs of every woman who suffered a miscarriage so that she could have the joy of holding a baby in her arms. But that was the hardest thing, just the fear that this is not going to end well for me and I'm going to suffer, and that I had to deal with that. That could have been the outcome. And then the other thing, when you go through the stages of grief and you finally arrive at that acceptance, it's so hard because acceptance feels like you're saying that was okay and I'm moving on. And there's a level of, but I don't want to move on. I don't want to move on without my child.
You feel like you're kind of betraying your child, don't you?
It feels like massive betrayal. But the reality is that our 5 babies are in heaven.
Yes.
They are experiencing a life that I can't even imagine. And they know who I am, and they're going to know who I am when I get there. I'm going to hear them say mama, and I'm going to be able to hold them and kiss them and count all their toes. And none of that, God has not taken that reality away from me or from any mother who's lost a preborn baby. That is going to happen. It's just delayed right now. And that's the hardest thing. And moving on and saying, okay, we're going to move on with our life, and we're going to rejoice, and we're going to thank the Lord. And we had to do that because we had 3 other children and they were grieving, and they needed to know that I was okay, because children look to us to see, how am I doing? Am I okay? Because if mom's okay, then I'm going to be okay. And so, it was hard, but God, I just had to look to him every day and for truth and for strength to get up and to carry on without our children.
Yeah, that's so important because, like you, I can't imagine walking through something like this without a relationship with Jesus. I wouldn't want to know.
Oh no, I wouldn't want to, and I don't think I could, because I remember when I lost the twins, and it was a week before Christmas, and I was far along, and they were concerned about me going into labor and the holidays, and so my husband and I decided that we were going to just have a DNC, and so it was a painful decision for me, and um, I woke up 4.5 hours later, and the DNC did not go as expected. The doctor put the catheter up through my uterus and my bowels, and I was looking at a 6-week recovery.
Oh, my.
And so I was grieving the loss of 2 more babies, twins that we desperately wanted, and I was looking at a 6-week recovery. And I just felt like I just remember standing at the window one night, and my husband was in bed, and it was dark, and I was looking at the stars, and I just said, God, I don't think I can survive this. I'm in so much pain, and I didn't want to hurt myself. I didn't want to harm myself, but I would have been okay if I had gone to sleep and woke up in heaven. It's just so much grief is not easy on the soul. And if I didn't know that God was a good father who literally picks us up and carries us through the valley of death, I I I don't know how people do it. I don't.
I don't either. I can remember I love what you said, that how it affects your soul. I remember probably a year after we lost Ryan, reading the book Soul Keeping by John Ortberg. And that book just really spoke to me in my grief.
Yeah.
And it's a book that I would recommend to anybody who's really struggling. That's something that you said a minute ago kind of triggered this question. Because grief affects everybody differently, it affects men and women differently. So how did you and your husband walk through this, giving each other the space and the freedom to grieve as individuals, but at the same time to be able to come together and grieve as a couple? Because there can be a real fine line there, because some people grieve in such opposite ways that it sometimes makes one a little angry at the other for not grieving the same way that, say, I'm grieving. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, one of the things that when you go through a miscarriage, everybody pays attention to the woman, and few people really check in or are concerned about the man, because the woman is usually, for me, it was traumatizing. I had to go through labor. Not the first one was a little earlier than the other ones, but the other ones we were almost to the second trimester, and the twins we were. And so I didn't realize that I was going to have to go through labor. In fact, one of them, our neighbor who's a midwife, came over, and she stayed with me all day and labored with me. And she even said, I had no idea this is what miscarriage was like. So it was even alarming for her. But for my husband, Donnie had his own grief, but then the male is the protector. And
Right.
so that kicked in, and he was trying to protect me by not really processing his grief, because he didn't want to add to mine. But when you go through it 5 times, we had to learn to really just keep talking, keep communicating, and keep sharing and offering each other grace, because we were working through the stages of grief, and I might be at anger and he might be in depression, or going through it 5 times, we were kind of in those stages all at once. And
Yeah.
so you just have to have grace for each other, and you have to be able to recognize, hey, you need to call one of your friends, and you need to go out, and you need to process through your pain. And so that was helpful to us. We have a wonderful community of friends, and they were checking in with us. So communicating with your mate, and having just extra grace from heaven for each other. And we did not do it perfectly. We cried. We hurt each other. Why aren't you crying? Do you not care? And then we just had to come back and forgive each other,
Yeah.
and realize that it was just a moment in our life where we just needed to depend on the Lord for everything we were going through, and to be mindful, to just trust in him, and just give everything to him, and to be gentle with each other.
Yeah, those are good words because there's nothing easy about that. And a lot of times the husband feels very helpless in that role as a protector and defender. And there's really nothing anybody can do to help him, to fix that for him. It's just something that men have to walk through when something like that happens. Because I can remember we had 2 miscarriages in between Whitney and Ryan. So I remember, and I don't know, what do you think about this? I think in our culture, and I don't mean this literally, but I think we almost dismiss grief associated with miscarriage because we don't think about a woman often having to go through labor as if she were having a baby that was going to be born alive. And so I think sometimes people just kind of expect women to move on and get over it a lot quicker than somebody who loses a child they've had for years.
Yeah.
I mean, did you find that to be true?
Absolutely. And I understandably, I've had friends that they didn't experience it the same way I did. And that's true of grief in all.
Oh, yeah.
But for me, it rocked me to the core. And of course, going through 5 miscarriages is not easy. But yeah, I think as a society, people, would say to me, oh, well, at least it was in the early stages.
When that phrase "at least" is used, that it's not going to be good after that, typically.
And I just would stand there and be like, oh my goodness,
just stop.
God must have needed your baby in heaven.
Yeah.
I had to be careful not to kick into, that's just bad theology. God doesn't need anybody. My baby doesn't turn into an angel.
No, they don't.
All of these things, and that's where you have to be careful because a lot of times you feel like people are expecting you to minister to them in those moments because they feel bad. And it's like, I just don't have anything to give you right now. I'm empty. And, people do say, hurtful things. And I know that they don't mean to. And I know I've been in situations where it's uncomfortable and you're trying to say something and you realize you're messing it up. So I have found it's best just to be there, just to be present, just to make a meal or send a card or offer to go on a coffee date and just listen. And those are the things that really matter. I always tell people, you don't have to say anything. Just being here with me. My girlfriend came one day and I was still recovering from surgery, and she just sat here. We just sat. It was a silent day. We didn't talk a lot. I was kind of sleeping, but she just sat with me and, she read while I took a nap, but it was just nice to have somebody here. So we often think we have to fill in the space with words, and we don't. Sometimes silence is profound.
It is, and I think a lot of us struggle with silence when we're in the presence of someone else because we feel like there's something wrong or they're going to think something's wrong if I'm not saying something. But I love what you said because so many other guests have expressed the exact same thing, Betty, that what they remember the most are the people that simply showed up and sat with them. In that early stage of grief, you're in such a state of shock. You're not going to remember what people said anyway.
Right.
So, if you're listening and there's somebody in your life that is going through this, it's not you, but somebody else. You don't have to go and say something that you feel like needs to be profound in order to help them. What will be the most profound is if you simply do what Betty just shared. Show up. If there's something practical that you notice needs to be done, take care of it. You don't have to ask, but just show up. That way they know that you love them and you care about them. We're not projects that need to be fixed anyway. No other human being can fix us. It's a process that we walk through with the Lord.
Yeah, it's
And
true.
it takes time.
Yeah, it does. But he's so faithful, and he's
He is.
so good. And I love, this morning I was reading in Genesis where Joseph's brothers came, and he, for the first time, saw his little brother Benjamin, and he hadn't seen him since he was a little boy, and now he was a grown man. And so he walks out of the room and he's grieving. He's grieving that, he doesn't get to go back and redo that. And then he comes out and he says, "Let's eat." And it was just like, you can be mourning and celebrating, moving on with your life at the same time, because we that happened before Christmas, and we had 3 little children, and we had to continue. I had to be grieving, and yet I didn't want my children to their life to stop. So we went through Christmas, and I went to Christmas parties, and I just remember one of my favorite memories of that Christmas was my cousin just sat down on the couch with me, and she just held my hand, and I cried, and she just let me cry. She didn't say anything. Her presence was so profound. She just let me cry, and then she said, "Okay, do you want something to eat, or do you want to just sit here?" And that's all I could think about when I read Joseph. I'm like, oh, I've experienced that. And so it is okay for you to be mourning and to let your community know, hey, I'm here. My heart is mourning, but I'm also so thankful to be with you.
Yeah, they're not separate entities.
No.
It all runs concurrently.
Yeah.
We're the death of a child, it never leaves the parent. You may not be conscious of that in the moment, but it's always there subconsciously, and anything can trigger the memory. Just something associated with your child, and it becomes very conscious again. But yes, I love what you said, because we can experience joy and fullness and meaning and purpose in life again, but it's not because we've gotten over it. It's because we have learned how to live with it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what hope is. In that I loved your daughter, Whitney. I was listening to your podcast with her, and I love how you interviewed your whole family, because everybody walks through grief in different ways. And I think that's so beautiful to listen to your story. But Whitney said that she wears, I think it's a bracelet that has a semicolon on
Yes.
it.
No, she actually has the tattoo.
The tattoo. And she was talking about the semicolon means there's more. And I think that's so beautiful, because that's what helps you and your faith, knowing, oh, there's more, because the enemy doesn't get the last word. So if it's not good, then it's not the last word. God is still working. And that's the truth that we have to hold on to, that semicolon. When she said that, I was like, oh, I wanted to go get a tattoo.
Oh, I can't.
Probably a bracelet, but I just love that. So
I can hardly wait to share that with her.
oh my goodness, that was such a good word from her.
It absolutely was. And that was the hardest interview that I ever did, was interviewing my own daughter.
First of all, when I saw it, I was like, what, but yes, that's courage. courage is to be able to step into the face of this is going to be hard, but who better to interview your daughter? You're going to be tender with her, and you're going to walk her through the process. That's a good father, Greg, who walks his child through the valley and says, you're not doing this alone. I'm right here.
You're very, very sweet to say that. It's been a hard journey for her. And I think a lot of times siblings, well, they're known as the forgotten mourners.
Yeah.
Because the parents usually get all the attention, and that, understandably so. But, for a brother or sister to lose a sibling, if it hasn't happened to you, you don't really realize how traumatic that is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I thought that's one of the reasons that we formed the Empty Chair Endeavor, is to include both parents and siblings in that.
Yeah, I love that. And all of our kids, when we went through the miscarriages, our children walk through it too. And we talked about the babies, and we were all together at the beach one year, and it was shortly after our son Jed was born, and we were talking about the babies. And the first baby, I always called her I didn't name her. Actually, we were talking about naming them, and our children asked if they could name them, and so each of them named the three miscarriages. And then when I lost the twins, I woke up that morning, um, and I just heard the name. I heard Sons of Thunder, and I thought, okay, that's James and John. And so I just started calling the twins James and John. And Donnie, I told him what I woke up and the first names I heard. So that was the ones we had named, but the other three we hadn't named. And our three children asked if they could each have one of the babies. And they prayed and asked God what they should name. And so Jordan, our daughter Jordan, named our daughter Joy. And our son Jonah named Joshua, and our daughter Milady named Samuel. And it was just a sweet weekend, and it was kind of like their offering for what they had gone through too. But they certainly mourned. And even my daughter Jordan got married 4 years ago, and she actually another level of grief came up for her, because she realized that if Joy had lived, she would have been part of her bridal party.
Oh gosh.
That was really sad for her to
I bet
realize.
that's kind of like the future grief that we sometimes refer to, things that will never happen because, but how sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, it is hard. I mean, even at Christmas time, we my husband's mother, my mother-in-law, made each of the babies an ornament. So we hang them on the tree, and we remember them every year. And when they're the day that we lost them, I remember, whether I'm thinking about it or not. Oh, that's something that always surprises me. I can, around May, I start to feel a little sadness, and I'm always like, what is this? What's happening? And then I look at the calendar and I'm like, oh, we lost a baby, this month. And so those are things that your body, the body keeps score is a great book. And that's just a great example that we can, our bodies are never going to forget the trauma they've been through. But it's also, in hope. Someone painted us a picture of our twins in heaven. I had a vision when they died, and I spoke about the vision that God gave me of the twins in a bed of lilies of the valley flowers, and with Jesus. And the artist at the conference came up to me after, and she said, God showed me your boys and I'm going to paint them. And so she painted a portrait of James and John that hangs in our living room. And that reminds us that it's not the end. The end is when all of us are in heaven and we are all seated at the Lord's Supper and we are celebrating. And the Ringeisens are all together, and all 9 of my children are at my table. That's the end.
Oh, that is just amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I love that because I completely agree with you.
We have to, when we've lost a child, and I know you've experienced this, Greg, I've listened to your podcast, so I know that you know that heaven is the end, and we just have to keep our eyes focused on that. Because if we focus on earth and we focus on the grief and the anger and the sadness, then it will consume us. But Jesus died to take our suffering. And so it's grieving in his presence and it's standing at the cross. I picture it in my mind when I'm overwhelmed, and I picture him dying on the cross, and I picture myself at the foot of the cross, and I'm lifting up the grief and the sadness and the anger and the questions and the lies, and I'm giving them to him because that's what he came for. And he wants us to give him what he came for.
Absolutely.
So that's what helps us to get up every morning and say, the joy of the Lord is my strength.
My strength. And he can carry it so much better than we can. He never intended for us to do it alone.
Yeah, no, I'd be in a dark closet rocking back and forth if I wasn't able to daily do that with the things of this world, the hurt, because Jesus said in this life you will have suffering. He's the solution to the suffering, to give it to him and take on his yoke. And that's what I try to daily do. And that's what helps me to walk through grief, and there's memories and there's sadness. Even today, I was with a friend and we had to stop by an office building, and I realized the office building was where I went every time I had a miscarriage. They have to take your blood every week to make sure that your levels are dropping. And if they're not dropping, that's a sign that, there's something going on. And I just was like a little taken back. I didn't realize she just gave me the address, and I didn't realize until I walked in. I was like, oh, this is where I went every week. And it really was every time I walked in, I was having my blood taken from a miscarriage.
Yeah, those are hard. Those are what we sometimes refer to as ambushes.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, you think you're doing great, and you come across something like that, and it's like, it can just take you right back to those early moments.
Yeah. And when that happens, it's such an invitation to sit down and just to practice the presence of God and to allow the shalom of heaven to fill your soul again, and to remind you that this is just a temporary journey, that heaven is going to be forever, and that our loved ones will be there. And we have to remind ourselves of that. Otherwise, it just builds up and builds up. And that can and will cause us to be angry at God.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Betty, before we go, I do want to talk about your book.
Okay.
I think we referred to it earlier in the conversation. I know that the title is Waiting for Jedediah. I can't remember the subtitle, but you know it, so you can share that. And I'd like for you just to talk about what the basic theme of the book is, and was that inspired you to write it.
Well, all along when I was having miscarriages, Greg, I keep a journal, and I was journaling. God used this. I was writing things down. when I would have a miscarriage, I would write things down. God was laying the foundation of this book as I was actually walking through the miscarriages. And when I was writing the book, I would go back and read those, and some of the lines from my journal are in the book. But long before I knew it was a book, God was telling my story. So I had to wait, though. Jedediah is 18 years old now, and it took me that long to be able to come to place in my own journey where I felt like I could tell my story and not fall apart. And that still happened. I worked with a writing coach, and there were moments I just sat there with her and just cried. And she allowed me to cry because it was another layer of grief. And I felt like once I tell this story, it's going to feel like it's done. That's not true. But, and I had to remember all the moments that I had worked really hard to forget, the trauma, the pain. But I wanted to minister to other women because I realized that 1 in 4 women have a miscarriage at some point during their years of trying to have children. And I thought that that's not good. That's not good. And I'm not going to leave them hanging with no. And I felt like my story is filled with hope. So yes, it is about miscarriage, but the book is really about healing and hope. And during those months that I was miscarrying, the Lord was so present, and he was working through other things that had come up from my past that were affecting the way I was walking through miscarriage. And I talk about them in the book, like unforgiveness, how I had to forgive the doctor who hurt me during the surgery. He didn't intend to do it, but it kind of stirred up other moments in my life where I was holding onto unforgiveness that had nothing to do with the miscarriages that were from 20 years ago. And that's the beauty of the book. One of my reviewers actually on Amazon said, "This is just a practical book no matter what you're going through, because they're concepts of freedom and how not to get stuck in a moment when you're going through trauma." And that compelled me to keep writing. I really did want to stop, and it took me that long to get the courage to tell our story. But I want to minister to other young women who go through a miscarriage and believe that it's final. I want them to know that God is a good God who meets us in the valley of the shadow of death and carries us through. And everything in the Bible points to a loving Father who will never leave and never forsake us. And that's what I learned during that season of my life. And I believe that that's what people need. They need hope, and they need to know that God is good, and they need to know, yes, I've been through it. It's not the same. Everybody's story is different. But if you trust in the Lord, He will heal you.
Yes, He will, in His time and in His way.
That's right.
And Betty, I think I know the answer to this without asking, but did you find that writing that book helped you in your healing journey?
I did, because, Greg, when you read the scriptures, you see that Jesus taught through story. We call it, some translations call them the parables, but actually they're stories.
They're stories.
And they're stories that are designed to teach something about God, how God is, what He's like, who we are. And so we're all in a love story, and we go through things in our life, and if we will allow God to work through those things, we can find our place in His story, and and we can allow him to use our story to minister to other people who are going through something like it, that will give them hope, because life is hard on earth, and
Indeed.
we're meant to encourage each other, and to come along and say, hey, your story is not going to end like mine, because we're all unique, but God's in your story. And if you'll let him, he'll teach you how to write your story. So I hope that the women that read it will understand that they have a story too, and there's a good author, and he's writing your story, and he has so much good for you. The goodness of God is I can't understand it, and I know I'm not going to be able to grasp it until I stand before him, and then I'm not going to be standing. I'm just going to be laying on his lap.
Yep. Yep.
Thanking him. So, yeah.
And what you just said too reminds me, and I refer back to this scripture so often, Romans 8:28. It talks about how God can use any and everything in our lives for good.
Yeah.
We can't see it at the time. You can't possibly imagine that anything good is going to come from the death of your child. But God can and does bring good if we'll lean into him and let him go through that grief journey with us. And I see evidence of that verse all over again as I've been hearing your story.
Yeah.
So thank you for your transparency and for giving us a glimpse into your life and how God has done just such an amazing work after such unbelievable loss.
Thank you.
Because, I think your story is going to touch a lot of people, and I think it's going to give them a lot of hope and encouragement as they listen. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Greg. And thank you, because, I'm sure you couldn't imagine how God was going to use your son's death. And here you are, and this podcast is probably reaching people that you don't even know. And people will be coming up to you in heaven saying, you ministered to my heart and you don't even know it. So it'll be a crown that you throw at Jesus's feet. Just telling your story and inviting other people into God's story for them. It's beautiful.
Oh. Well, thank you for saying that. And I love that almost 10 years after we lost him, that Ryan is still touching people's lives today, just like your children.
Yeah.
Because you're willing to let God use your pain for his glory.
Yeah, that's right. I'm so happy that, my 5 children in heaven, this is their story. And I wrote it so that people would know that they lived here on earth and their lives mattered. And they live for a short time, but every life matters to God.
Exactly. And every story is important because every story matters to God.
That's right. I love that, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you again, Betty, for being our guest today.
Thank you. And if your readers are interested in furthering our conversation, they can meet me at Betty Ringeisen.com. And again, the book is called Waiting for Jedediah, How to Experience God's Healing After Miscarriage. And they can find it on Amazon. And Greg, once again, I just appreciate your time and your invitation to come and chat with you today.
Well, the honor has been all mine, and you'll find those links on this episode summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Well, thank you for joining us today. If you would like to offer your thoughts on today's episode, simply click the link under the episode summary. And if you're interested in sharing your story on a future episode, email us using the provided link. Join us again in 2 weeks to hear another story of how God meets us in our pain, creates something beautiful from the broken pieces, and restores meaning, purpose, and hope.